World Health Organization declares the coronavirus a pandemic, and Chinese people create a new language to get around censorship. This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Hey, have you ever wondered what the coronavirus actually feels like? Well, let's find out from a man who got it in Wuhan, China, where the outbreak began.
It felt like I could only use half my lung capacity, and every breath that I took wasn't enough, and I just couldn't get enough air. Also, it sounded like I was breathing through a paper bag. It sounded like there was just stuff in my lungs that just wouldn't go away.
Well, now you know. Good thing, too, because the coronavirus has finally been labeled a pandemic by the horribly corrupt World Health Organization. Wait, what is going on in that picture? Apparently, it's a statue that was originally set up for an upcoming festival that is now canceled because of the coronavirus. And now, it's public health art. The coronavirus is now also spreading within the United States. People who have not traveled overseas or been exposed to people who did travel have contracted the coronavirus. As of recording, the death toll in the U.S. has risen to 30, and the National Guard has been sent to New York. You know, I really loved Escape from New York, but I'd rather not live it. Meanwhile, the NBA. Just last summer, the NBA had been looking forward to expanding its China partnerships. Until, of course, the brouhaha over Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey's support for the Hong Kong protests. That didn't go well. And now, the NBA has the coronavirus. Okay, more specifically, Utah Jazz center Rudy Gobert has the coronavirus. And as a precaution, the NBA has suspended its season until further notice. Meanwhile, the Chinese Basketball Association has told Americans who play for the CBA that they have to return to China to finish out the season. If they don't, they could be banned for life. Don't worry, I'm sure it's totally safe. But if these American basketball players do return to China, they'll be put in quarantine for 2 weeks. That's because China is now quarantining all international arrivals. Yes, the country where the coronavirus began, that said it was absolutely ridiculous when other countries began instituting travel bans and quarantining travelers from China, is now quarantining anyone who arrives in China. I love the smell of hypocrisy in the morning. But maybe it's not hypocrisy if the coronavirus didn't come from China. Last week I told you about how the Chinese Communist Party is trying to blame the U.S. for the coronavirus. Well, this week, they're still doing it. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying tweeted that because the director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control said that some coronavirus cases had been misdiagnosed as the flu, that means we shouldn't call it the Chinese coronavirus. And in case the implication that the coronavirus may have started in the U.S. was too subtle for you, here's the other Foreign Ministry spokesperson. Yes, he's accusing the U.S. Army of possibly bringing the coronavirus to Wuhan in the first place. Who needs the NBA when we can watch this for entertainment? 29 people have died after a Chinese hotel that was used to quarantine coronavirus patients collapsed. Why did the hotel collapse? I'm not saying they built it badly, but they built it badly. It was not originally built as a hotel, but was converted to one. And state-run media have reported that there were multiple rounds of illegal building renovations. And adding to the tragedy, no one in the hotel had tested positive for the coronavirus in the first place. Chinese internet users are desperately trying to preserve an early account of how the Chinese Communist Party tried to silence doctors speaking out about the coronavirus. Censors have been deleting the story every time it crops up, but internet users have come up with some clever ways of keeping it up. Some have translated the story using emojis, Braille, even an invented Martian language. It was a style of internet chatting that came from Taiwan around 2004, basically their version of Leet. The characters randomly combine, split, and rebuild traditional Chinese characters, Japanese characters, Pinyin, and sometimes English and Kaomoji, a mixture of symbols that conveys an emotion, like happy. Although if I were in charge, happy would be illustrated with this. The downside to the Martian language is that now the Chinese Communist Party will claim that Mars has been a part of Chinese territory since ancient times. One of the biggest problems the US faces in battling the coronavirus is the fact that so much of our stuff is made in China. Most generic drugs and a lot of medical equipment, including the type of masks that filter out the virus, are made there. So, the Trump administration is removing tariffs on certain medical supplies from China. You'd think the Chinese Communist Party would be happy that Trump is reducing some of his dreaded tariffs. That could be a boost to the Chinese economy at a time when they really need it. But no, Beijing threatened that it can impose pharmaceutical export controls, after which America will be plunged into the mighty sea of coronavirus. So they don't want America to buy made in China. Good. Let's start making medical supplies in the US again. Remember this the next time you hear someone talking about how we should work more with China. 16 lawmakers affiliated with the GOP Doctors Caucus of the U.S. House of Representatives are calling on the World Health Organization to recognize Taiwan. In this press release, they said the ongoing exclusion of Taiwan from the WHO during this epidemic has put people in Taiwan, the PRC, and around the world at greater risk while harming both the integrity of the WHO and the security of member states. Sadly, the higher levels of the WHO are suffering from a condition in which they can't hear anything because their ears are just so stuffed full of Chinese money. Unfortunately, it's a widespread illness. Hong Kong protesters held a vigil for a young student who fell to his death during a protest in November. Needless to say, there was a heavy riot police presence nearby. Wait a minute. I know why Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam has been so deaf to the protesters' demands. She has the same condition as the WHO leadership. Her ears are too stuffed with Chinese money. I really think we need to find a cure for that one. A bipartisan group of U.S. senators drafted this resolution that basically says because of China's human rights abuses, including organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience, China shouldn't get to host the 2022 Olympics. And speaking of the Olympics, the Court of Arbitration for Sport has criticized a Chinese swimmer for a lack of remorse. Chinese swimmer Sun Yang got an 8-year ban from the Olympics for a drug testing violation. In a statement, the CAS said it was striking that in the course of his testimony, at no point did the athlete express any regret as to his actions or indicate that, with the benefit of hindsight, it might have been preferable for him to have acted differently. Rather, as the proceedings unfolded, he dug his heels in and eventually sought to blame others for the manifest failings that occurred. Really? I can't believe this guy would do that.
You lose her. I'm winning, yes?
Well, he certainly is a dope. And coming up next, I'll answer a question from a fan who supports China Uncensored on Patreon. But first, did you know YouTube has been secretly unsubscribing people from the show? Take a moment to make sure you're still subscribed. And if you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? And now, the question from China Uncensored 50 Cent Army member Robert W. Aitken. The Hong Kong protests were initially about extradition to the mainland, correct? Couldn't Taiwan and Hong Kong just make an extradition treaty agreement between each other and cut the mainland out totally? Well, that's a really good question. So the whole extradition bill thing began when a Hong Kong man allegedly murdered his pregnant girlfriend in Taiwan. It was pretty gruesome. The problem was that since Hong Kong is part of the People's Republic of China, and the People's Republic of China likes to pretend Taiwan isn't a country, Hong Kong could not have an extradition treaty with Taiwan, since Taiwan is a province of China, not a country. So the Hong Kong government used this murder case to propose legislation that would allow the city to transfer criminal suspects to Taiwan and other places with which it lacks an extradition treaty, including mainland China. And Hong Kongers felt that was just a Trojan horse. The extradition bill wasn't about this murder case. It was about sending political dissidents to mainland China for a taste of justice with Chinese characteristics. And the rest is history. Thanks for your question, Robert, and thank you for watching. Remember, YouTube has been demonetizing almost all of our videos. They'd have run us out of business if it weren't for support from fans like you who contribute on the crowdfunding website Patreon. I call them the China Uncensored 50-Cent Army. If you'd like to hear your question answered on the show, join the China Uncensored 50-Cent Army by going to patreon.com/China Uncensored. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.